30 days ago, the world changed, and most people are still trying to make sense of what actually happened, why it happened, and where this is all going. Today, we are going to slow everything down and walk through this war from the very beginning. Not the spin, not the talking points from one side or the other. Just the facts, the timeline, the context, and an honest attempt to understand one of the most significant geopolitical events of our lifetime. Because whether you are trying to follow the news intelligently, understand the global consequences, or just make sense of why the world feels so different right now, you deserve a clear, straight account of what is actually going on. So let us start at the beginning. Welcome to the Dividend Desk. Today we are stepping outside our usual investing content to do something we think matters just as much. Help you understand the world your money lives in. No agenda, no political side, just facts and context. Let us get into it. To understand what happened on February 28, 2026, you have to go back much further than that. The tension between Iran, Israel, and the United States is not new. It did not start last month. It did not start last year. The hostility between these nations stretches back decades, rooted in ideology, regional power struggles, nuclear ambition, and a long history of proxy conflicts fought through other countries and other people. But the specific chain of events that led to the war we are living through right now began accelerating in the summer of 2025. And to understand where we are today, you need to understand every link in that chain. In June of 2025, Israel launched a major and sudden airstrike campaign against Iranian nuclear and military facilities. What made the timing particularly stunning was that nuclear talks between the United States and Tehran were still technically ongoing when the bombs started falling. Iran responded almost immediately with large-scale missile and drone attacks on Israeli cities. The conflict lasted 12 days and became known as the 12-Day War. In those 12 days, Israel and the United States struck the nuclear facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow, the core of Iran's nuclear program. Several of Iran's most senior military commanders were killed, including leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. At least 10 of Iran's leading nuclear scientists were assassinated. Iranian internet was blacked out by the government as the strikes continued. By the time a ceasefire was brokered on June 24th, under heavy U.S. pressure, Iran's death toll was estimated at between 1,000 and 1,200 people. Thousands more were wounded, tens of thousands were displaced, and Iran's nuclear program, while not destroyed, had been set back significantly. The world exhaled. Diplomacy appeared to resume. In August 2025, Iran agreed to return to nuclear talks with the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. By November, Oman was urging both Washington and Tehran back to the negotiating table. Trump publicly stated that Iran had requested the removal of crippling economic sanctions and that he was open to dialogue. It looked, however, briefly, like the June war had created a painful but potentially productive opening for a negotiated settlement. Then December came, and everything shifted again. Beginning in late December 2025, massive nationwide protests erupted inside Iran. They were driven by a collapsing economy, a currency in freefall, and the accumulated rage of a population that had been living under decades of economic mismanagement and authoritarian repression. The demonstrations grew rapidly into the largest wave of civil unrest Iran had seen since the 1979 revolution, an estimated 5 million Iranians taking to the streets across the country. The Iranian government's response was brutal. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij forces were deployed with live ammunition, shotguns, pellet guns, mounted machine guns, and drones. The deadliest incidents occurred on January 8th and 10th of 2026, when the regime carried out what international observers described as massacres of protesters. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei personally ordered the crackdowns. The international community watched in horror. Human rights organizations documented the killings in real time. And in Washington, the footage and the numbers were being tracked very closely. On February 25, 2026, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi publicly stated that a historic opportunity to reach a nuclear agreement with the United States was within reach. A third round of indirect talks was scheduled in Geneva for February 26. Trump had previously issued a 10-day deadline for a deal, and that clock was running. The talks happened. Reports from the room suggested the two sides were still far apart, but the diplomatic channel was open. Oman's foreign minister went on record saying a breakthrough had actually been reached, that Iran had agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium, had accepted full verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and had committed to irreversibly downgrading its current enriched uranium stockpiles to the lowest level possible. He called it a moment of peace within reach. Further talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. They never happened. On the evening of February 27, 2026, U.S. President Donald Trump gave the order to proceed. The operation was called Epic Fury. In the early hours of February 28, CENTCOM announced that the United States and partner forces had begun a comprehensive airstrike campaign against Iran. U.S. warships launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. The U.S. Army deployed HIMARS long-range rocket systems. B-2 stealth bombers, B-1 Lancers, and B-52 Stratofortresses were all used to strike deeply fortified ballistic missile facilities across the country. Pentagon officials later stated that the opening barrage amounted to roughly twice the firepower of the shock and awe campaign that opened the 2003 invasion of Iraq. It was not a warning shot. It was not a limited strike. It was a full military assault. The Israeli strikes that accompanied the American campaign targeted the Iranian leadership directly. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the de facto head of state and top spiritual authority for millions of Shia Muslims worldwide, was killed in the opening hours of the war. The strikes also killed General Abdolrahim Musavi, the commander of the Iranian army, Mohammad Pakpour, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Ali Shamkhani, a senior advisor to Khamenei. In a single night, the entire top tier of the Iranian government's military and religious leadership had been eliminated. The regime had been decapitated. The world woke up on March 1, 2026, to a Middle East that looked nothing like it had 24 hours earlier. Iran's response was immediate and ferocious. Hundreds of missiles and drones were launched against Israeli cities and against U.S. military assets across the region. Civilian infrastructure and energy targets in the Gulf were struck. Iranian forces moved quickly to do something that much of the world had feared for years, but never quite believed would happen. They closed the Strait of Hormuz to U.S.-aligned shipping. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. Closing it even partially does not just affect the countries directly involved in the conflict. It sends shockwaves through every major economy on Earth. Oil prices responded instantly and violently. Iran launched additional retaliatory strikes targeting U.S. embassies across the Middle East, military installations throughout the region, and oil infrastructure including vessels attempting to transit the strait. Global air travel into and out of the Middle East was halted almost immediately. Major shipping companies began rerouting vessels around the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, adding thousands of miles and weeks of transit time to supply chains that the global economy depends on. The war had been going for less than 72 hours, and it was already disrupting the movement of oil, goods, and people on a global scale. The first American military casualties were announced by the Pentagon within days, soldiers killed in an attack on a U.S. base in the region. The human cost on all sides began to climb. Across the Middle East, governments scrambled to declare their positions. The Gulf Cooperation Council states found themselves caught between their close security relationships with the United States and their geographic vulnerability to Iranian retaliation. Several Gulf states saw their own energy infrastructure targeted. The Philippines, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, declared a national energy emergency. Across Europe and Asia, governments convened emergency sessions to assess supply chain exposure, energy dependency, and diplomatic options. Inside Iran, the situation was extraordinary and deeply complicated. The regime had lost its supreme leader and much of its military command in the opening hours. But the institutions of the Islamic Republic did not simply collapse overnight. The IRGC remained operational. Hardline factions within the government moved quickly to consolidate control. Meanwhile, the protest movement that had been shaking the country since December continued, some factions rallying around a nationalist response to the foreign attacks, others seeing the chaos as a potential opening for the kind of change they had been demanding in the streets. Trump, for his part, maintained throughout the opening days of the conflict that the goal was not regime change, but the permanent and verifiable elimination of Iran's nuclear weapons capability. He framed the operation as a necessary and decisive action to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran from destabilizing the entire Middle East and threatening Israel's existence. He also pointed repeatedly to the tens of thousands of protesters killed by the Iranian regime as a moral justification for the military action. Critics, both domestic and international, questioned the timing given how close the diplomatic talks had reportedly come to a breakthrough. They questioned the legality of the strikes under international law, and they raised serious concerns about what comes next in a country of 89 million people with a deeply entrenched revolutionary government structure that does not simply dissolve when its leadership is killed. As of the time of this recording, the conflict is ongoing. The Strait of Hormuz situation remains volatile. Oil markets are elevated, diplomatic backchannels are reportedly active, but no ceasefire has been announced. The situation on the ground inside Iran is fluid. And the broader question of what comes after, what a post-war Iran looks like, who leads it, what relationship it has with its neighbors and with the West, remains entirely unanswered. What we do know is this. The world that existed before February 28, 2026 is not coming back. Whatever the outcome of this conflict, whether it ends in weeks or stretches into something longer and more complicated, the balance of power in the Middle East has been permanently altered. The question of Iran's nuclear program, which has dominated international diplomacy for over 2 decades, has entered a new and deeply uncertain phase. And the global economy, already navigating inflation, shifting trade alliances, and geopolitical fragmentation, now has to absorb a war involving the world's most critical oil shipping lane. We will continue to follow this story closely here at the Dividend Desk and bring you clear, grounded analysis on both the geopolitical developments and the economic and investment implications as they unfold. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please share it with someone who is trying to make sense of what is happening. Hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss our follow-up coverage. We will see you at the next one.